Hi everyone, welcome to IsisParenting's Breastfeeding Chat and Learn. My name is Nancy Holtzman. I'm a mom and baby nurse educator and a board-certified lactation consultant and a board-certified pediatric nurse. I'm here in Needham, Massachusetts at IsisParenting's home office. With me today moderating the chat room is Cindy Meltzer, and today we're going to talk about weaning, and then I will answer general questions and answers about any related topic, babies, feeding, bottles, pumping, solids, you name it. We'll get to it. So put your questions in the Q&A box, and those go to me privately. And at the end of the short presentation on weaning, we will do all Q&A. It's interesting that when I was in the process of learning more about weaning myself, I read a whole bunch of books about weaning, and a lot of the books about weaning I thought could have been titled The History of Weaning, and then some of them could have been titled Why Not to Wean. And I kind of wondered in reading a book where you wanted to learn how to go about weaning, why the authors always seemed to be convincing you not to wean. Eventually, at some point, you are going to wean, whether your child is 3 weeks or 3 months or 13 months or 33 months or 53 months. At some point, you will wean, and so moms do want information pertaining to that. So, however, putting together this presentation, I found myself making lots of slides that were common reasons I hear for weaning, why women ask me for help weaning, and me trying to say, well, are you sure you want to wean? Do you really need to wean for that reason? And so on. So my goal here is to give you information to not just make a balanced decision, but actually give you concrete information about how to go about weaning when you're ready. And again, whether your baby is 3 months old or 13 months old or 23 or 33 or 43 months old, depending on the age and stage of your child, that will have a lot of impact as to how you will go about the weaning process. So I guess the first thing I do want to say is what's the rush? Think about whether it needs to be a complete weaning, because sometimes people do think it has to be all or nothing, and it really doesn't. I think it's always good to keep your foot in the door and keep your options open, and to try to determine to yourself what are the precursors to making you choose to wean, and if you lightened your load a little bit, would that help? So, for example, if feeding frequently throughout the night is wearing you down and your child is 9 months or 18 months old, is it really a total weaning that needs to happen, or may you be able to continue breastfeeding a few times a day if you get the sleeping situation underhand? So one thing we do know about breastfeeding is it's dose dependent. So some is better than none, and more is better than some, and you're going to do what you can do. So the benefits don't go away. I do have a toddler webinar on toddler breastfeeding that you can watch to learn more about the benefits and patterns of nursing a toddler, which is very, very different than nursing an infant. Certainly the hardest weeks of breastfeeding, in my opinion, are the early ones, and breastfeeding does get easier and more enjoyable the longer you go. And there are a lot of different reasons why people do think they need to wean, but don't necessarily. Like if you're going to go away for a weekend, or you're traveling for work, pregnancy, teeth, these are all common reasons why people think that they may need to wean. Or the baby has the first birthday, for example, and people assume that weaning happens after a year old. But it's not always the case. So thinking a little bit to what your alternatives might be, and even if that's just a gradual approach toward your overall goal of weaning, the slower, soothier, more gradual weaning approaches are going to be more beneficial both for the mom in terms of her physiology and her physical comfort, and the baby's physical comfort too, because moving away from a 100% breast milk diet to partial breast milk or formula, and then gradually as the babies begin eating solid foods, if you start substituting cow's milk based products, formula, or cow's milk for breastfeedings, again, there can be a lot of digestive issues for the baby. So a gradual transition is going to be more desired. And then some moms will think about dropping just 1 or 2 feedings during the day and substituting a bottle feeding for that, but breastfeeding the rest of the time. Night weaning we spoke briefly about, and we'll talk more about that. And then weaning from pumping. So for example, I get a lot of questions from moms whose babies are now turning close to a year old, and they want to begin expressing less at work or not at all at work. So they may not choose to completely wean, but they may want to give up pumping because they feel they can now give cows milk during the day, and that they would be happier and more relieved if they could nurse in the morning, nurse when they come home from work, nurse at bedtime, a little bit on the weekends, and not need to pump during the workday. So those types of options are possible too. A lot of people will ask about weaning for fertility, and sometimes women do need to reduce their breastfeeding frequency if they are hoping to resume ovulation in terms of becoming pregnant again. So if a baby is nursing during the day and once or twice at night, typically it may be, if you're fortunate, it may be 6 or 9 months before your period returns. And then of course in our typical culture, in the Western culture, most women do try to get their babies to be sleeping more and feeding less overnight. So that does help the return to fertility. In my opinion, it's nice to just enjoy the going as long as you can without getting your period due to breastfeeding. But if you're older, or if your goal is to have children very closely spaced together, or if you suspect that you may need reproductive technology for another pregnancy, and your goal is to begin ovulating again, then simply reducing the frequency of breastfeeding, and we can call that partial weaning or night weaning, may do that without completely weaning. If you do require fertility treatments or medications for, for artificial insemination or IVF or ICSI or something like that, most fertility specialists do want you to completely wean. And there's not a lot of great research on this. We certainly know that women can and do become pregnant while lactating. You certainly can become pregnant while you're breastfeeding, but having that request for women to completely wean before they begin to undergo fertility treatments is pretty standard. Part of that is probably due to the fact that fertility clinics maintain statistics in terms of their stats of pregnancy, and they're very, very focused on their stats. And so, they, in terms of being able to control any variables, they're very focused on that. But we don't have a whole lot of research about if somebody is ovulating or requires something like Clomid or certain types of hormones, even while breastfeeding, whether or not that impacts their ability to become pregnant when using assisted reproductive technology. But certainly do keep in mind, if you're focused on another child and breastfeeding your first, that optimal child spacing really is for the health of the mom and the health of the babies, and planning about 2 years between babies. But in some cases, that's not feasible for certain women, and if you are trying for very closely spaced babies, then maternal nutrition is going to be critical. So if your babies are close in age, then thinking about your calcium and your protein and so on. Of course, nursing during pregnancy is possible just because you're pregnant doesn't necessarily mean you need to wean, although sometimes weaning does happen early in pregnancy because the symptoms of pregnancy create sensitive breasts and nipples, and moms often, between nausea and feeling uncomfortable, feel like they don't want their toddler on them so much and nursing so much. And so for some women, the pregnancy does precipitate a weaning, and for other women, they'll just kind of hang in there and will continue to gradually taper down throughout the next few months of pregnancy. Certainly milk production will be impacted by pregnancy, and it depends on the mom and baby how they choose to handle that. So some people will nurse all the way through pregnancy, and then what's called tandem nursing, when the new baby is born and the milk comes in more fully, the baby nurses first, and then the toddler at that point can nurse. So some people will go that route. But you don't need to wean simply because you're pregnant. And certainly there is good research that shows unless there are certain issues like highly irritable uterus and premature contractions and things like that, then breastfeeding does not increase your risk of miscarriage or early labor. But again, here I'm talking about why not to wean, and we are going to talk about how to wean. Other questions I get a lot are weaning because moms want to go back on certain types of medications or need a certain type of a test or a surgery or a procedure. And so I've put some resources up here for you, which are very good to know about. The Infant Risk Center is a resource led by Tom Hale, and he's the big medications in mother's milk guru. So every 2 years, on even years, he puts out this new book, Medications in Mother's Milk, that all of us lactation folk keep at hand. And you can look up very specific medications and of course, the most common medications we hear about that women are concerned about taking during lactation and whether or not they should wean to go back on these medications are antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications. And there certainly are now good research studies that show which of them are going to be safer than others during pregnancy and during lactation. And many women go on to breastfeed and do not wean to take their mood stabilizers. Other medications are a little iffier, so things like lithium and other types of treatments for bipolar issues are a little more complex, and then certain types of seizure medications are a little bit more complex. So there truly are few but some medications that are not recommended when breastfeeding, and then depending on how serious those medications are, it's kind of a balancing act between how long you choose to breastfeed, forego that medication, which is better for you, which is better for the baby, and then what are the risks of taking a certain medication. And another option for you to know about is an app that I have on my iPhone, and it's you can visit the website. It's that ToxNet. It's a National Institute of Health governmental website where you can put in the name of a medication and it will give you information about that medication in lactation. And then this little app that you can search for on your iPhone or your Droid and add it to your homepage called LactMed, and I use that at least twice daily. Okay. Oh, and then I guess I just put on here, chemotherapy is pretty much contraindicated for breastfeeding. And, as wonderful and important as it is to breastfeed your baby, your health is important. And one thing I want to mention is most breast issues, lumps in the breast, block ducts, mastitis, and abscesses, and, sad things that hopefully none of you will need to deal with, in a lactating breast, it's very common and easy to assume, and it typically is related to the fact that a woman is lactating. But even breastfeeding women can and do get breast cancers and lumps in their breasts, and so you don't want to have a cavalier attitude about a lump in the breast and assume, oh, that's just a galactocele, that's just a milk cyst in the breast on a lactating woman. Chances are it is, but it's certainly important to get it looked at, worked up. Sometimes they'll do an ultrasound and what's called a needle-guided biopsy. So using ultrasound, they'll withdraw a little bit of the fluid from the cyst and make sure that it is really something that's minor and related to breastfeeding and not something more concerning. But there are cases where a certain type of cancer is discovered during pregnancy, and treatment is delayed until the baby is born, and then sometimes they'll decide it's safe for mom to continue breastfeeding for 1 or 2 months if she chooses, but then it's time to wean so that she can begin treatment for hopefully what's going to be an easily resolved cancer. So it's kind of hard to argue with that, I have to say. So before we get into the actual hows about weaning by a given age, let's just talk a little bit about gradual weaning, which is what I would recommend whenever possible, versus abrupt weaning, because you don't want to end up engorged, overfull, with mastitis and very uncomfortable, and also you don't want your baby to have to get used to a completely different milk source all at once either. So regardless of if you're weaning on the slower side or the quicker side, some of these tips are going to be very much the same for early engorgement, which sometimes we see sometime around day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, and then oversupply. Sometimes moms will work with these things, and also in terms of mastitis, some of these treatments are going to be similar. But when your breasts are a little bit overfull, some comfort measures that will be both helpful to reduce the fullness and make you more comfortable include things like using cold packs and ice. So bags of frozen peas and corn are my favorite ice packs. Just get 6 of them or so and keep them in the freezer. Put them in a Ziploc bag because they tend to get little tears on the edges, and then just keep using them and refreezing them because they scrunch up so nice and you can fit them all over your chest wherever it feels best. And it's really true that using ice and cold packs, number 1, will feel good, and number 2, will reduce inflammation and swelling. Ibuprofen, so brand names are Advil and Motrin, are also very good anti-inflammatory agents, and over the counter, those are 200 milligram tablets, so check with your healthcare professional, but typically 2 of those, which is 400 milligrams, is a standard dose, but you could even take 600 milligrams, which is 3 of the tablets or capsules, every 6 to 8 hours with food. And that actually has an anti-inflammatory effect in addition to making you feel more comfortable. It can also help with swelling, and sometimes the breasts may feel warm, and sometimes you maybe even have a mild fever due to the inflammatory process, and so taking ibuprofen can help with that. Tylenol, acetaminophen, is also safe to use and can be helpful, and you can actually stagger that with the ibuprofen. But the nice thing about using the ibuprofen is it does have that anti-inflammatory aspect that Tylenol does not have. Other things you'll want to do while you're weaning and your breasts feel a little bit uncomfortable or full, make sure you have a supportive bra. You could even wear 2 bras. And a lot of times people will ask about cabbage leaves. We don't have a lot of science behind it, but it certainly is true that for a lot of women, they find that washing a cabbage leaves and rinsing them well and refrigerating them and then putting on the crumpled leaves inside the bra over the breasts. It sounds bizarre, but it really does help. It makes the breasts feel cool, and it does help with swelling, and some people find that it does decrease their milk supply on the quicker. So in addition to using ice, you can try using the crumpled up cabbage leaves. Remove the hard core, so you're just using the soft crumpled up green leaves, and they do kind of have a cup shape to them, so they can just fit over your breasts, and usually after about 20 or 30 minutes they'll be warm and wilted, and you can discard them and put on fresh pair of the cabbage leaves. Other things to use if you are truly trying to wean and are finished nursing and you do want your milk to kind of pack its bags and go home more comfortably and quickly is real Sudafed. So this is what I call old-fashioned real Sudafed, pseudoephedrine. And to get this type of Sudafed, you need to show your license and get it behind the counter. So it may be in the pharmacy department, or it may be up at the front of your CVS or Walgreens, but it won't no longer be on the shelf. So there is a product on the shelf called Sudafed, but it does not contain pseudoephedrine anymore. And so don't be fooled by imitations. If I have a stuffy nose or my family, this is the product I want. And if you are a weaning mother and no longer want milk, this is what you can look for. So Sudafed is just a decongestant, but it does have a side effect of drying up. It dries up your mucous membranes and it dries up your milk. So taking that, just as the package describes, can also help with these other efforts in terms of reducing your milk production. And then finally, sage. So I just put the dried seasoning here, but sage, the seasoning, or sage leaves or sage tea or sage tincture is also something that's safe to use and is known to help decrease milk production. So whether you are finished nursing and did a gradual weaning but find yourself a little bit uncomfortably full, these are some methods that you can use. or if you do find for whatever reason you are abruptly weaning. These are some comfort measures to help the process along. Okay, so now we're getting into some reasons why people think that they probably need to wean, but may consider some workarounds. Traveling, a lot of times people will say, my baby's 3 months old, but when she's 6 months old, we're going to Puerto Rico for 3 days without the baby. And so I want to wean by then because I want to be drinking, or I just want to be away and not worry about the breast pump. Or some women will say, in 2 more months, I need to go on a business trip. I'm going to be gone for 5 days. And again, I would just say, well, let's keep an open mind. And as it gets closer to that time, you can see how the breastfeeding is going and how you're feeling about it then. Because when you're nursing a 6-week-old, it's kind of overwhelming to look ahead a few months and think, oh my gosh, I'm going to need to be doing this for another 3 or 4 months. But when you are nursing a 6-month-old or a 9-month-old, it's actually very easy and enjoyable. And so you may not be so eager to wrap things up. And traveling and being a breastfeeding mom is actually easier than you think. So I put a hyperlink here to an article that you can read, and it talks a little bit about how to maintain your supply. And you can do that minimally if your focus is not to keep up a full supply or to bring home every drop. Then you can express milk 3 or 4 or 5 times in a 24-hour period. But if you are hoping to keep your supply up, probably you'll be needing to express 5 times in 24 hours, and it's much easier than you think to bring the milk home with you. So that article does outline some of that information, how to travel with the breast milk. Weaning from pumping. So again, whether you're pumping at work 3 times a day because you're back at work 5 days a week, or maybe you're exclusively pumping for choice or by situation. Often moms are exclusively pumping because they had a lot of breastfeeding issues early on, or for a variety of other reasons ended up not breastfeeding directly, but pumping and giving the baby the expressed breast milk by bottle. And you can begin to taper that down slowly and gradually. And there's several different ways you can do it, but you can pump less often. So if you're back at work and you're pumping 3 times a day for 15 minutes, and you typically express 6 ounces total, you may begin to pump twice a day at work rather than 3 times. You could also begin to pump for a reduced number of minutes. So if you usually pump for 15 minutes, maybe start pumping for 12 minutes and then pump for 8 minutes. And or another way to do it is to pump for a lower volume of milk. So remember, when you're going through this route, you've already come to terms with the fact that you're not going to end up with the same volume of milk. So I'm not suggesting that you can cut down your pumping but still take home the same volume of milk. But that would not be the goal for someone that's beginning to cut down their pumping and wean gradually from pumping. So if you're typically pumping 3 times a day, 6 ounces at work, then you might pump 2 or 3 times a day, but pump just to the point of relief. So you may express 2 or 3 ounces rather than 5 or 6, so that you're not feeling overfull or engorged. And then gradually over the course of several days or a week or so, you're going to begin to make less milk. And that will keep you more comfortable. So gradually you can perhaps get down to pumping once a day in the afternoon at work, or gradually not at all. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about night weaning. So I called that Milkies Go Night Night. And there's a lot of different ways that you can present this to your child. If they're, under 18 months, they're probably not going to care too much about, we don't nurse when the moon is out, we nurse when the sun is out, and so on. But, a lot of night weaning issues people ask about as though it were a breastfeeding issue, but really these are sleep issues. And breastfeeding is a wonderful and beneficial sleep association, and for families that are bed sharing and that works well, you may nurse once or twice a night, or you may nurse 4 or 5 times a night, and as long as everybody is sleeping well, that may be your family style and your family choice, and that may go on for a number of months or longer. But at some point, if you choose, or your partner chooses, or the baby, the toddler, is not getting a good night's sleep anymore, to make a change, then these are some ways to go about it. So by deciding that you're going to close the milk bar overnight, some things that might be helpful are to begin creating space between the baby and the mom. So that proximity is going to backfire on you in the middle of the night. And, let's face it too, you have to have a conversation with your partner, and everybody needs to be on the same page, because your partner is going to really have to pitch in, because at 3 o'clock in the morning, the least thing you want to do is bicker over what to do, who's going to what to do next, who's going to take care of the baby now, what to try. And then it's easy, of course, just to cave and say, oh, we're just so exhausted and he's been up twice and I'm just going to pull him back into bed and nurse. And so if that's not the goal, if that's not what you're working on, then making sure that you have an action plan and an understanding. Okay, the first time he wakes up, this is what we're going to do. And the second time, this is what we're going to do, and so on. Having partner resettle is going to be effective, because of course, it's harder for mom to resettle without nursing. I do suggest offering a sip of water from a cup, and that's only to make sure that the baby is not thirsty. So don't substitute the breastfeeding in the middle of the night with a bottle feeding of water. If the baby is younger, and we'll talk about that in a minute, if the baby is younger and you're substituting a breastfeeding for a feeding of expressed milk or formula, then that's a separate issue. But here I'm talking about an older baby who is going to be shut off at night from feeding. And so, for example, a lot of babies up until 6 months to 9 months may still get up once or twice a night and nurse. And depending on your mindset and your philosophy, you may be able to reduce your baby down to one night waking, which is typically at 3 or 4 a.m. to do a feeding. And a lot of babies don't feed at all. And a lot of parents will facilitate their baby not to eat sometime between, say, 9 p.m. and 5 or 6 a.m. And that's possible and feasible for a baby that's over 6 to 8 months or so. Not every baby, but some babies can be helped into a pattern like that. I would not say that's a very biologically or physiologically expected or typical pattern, but in our particular culture, we expect babies to adapt to that cultural expectation. And babies, because they are adaptable and they are set on survival, they can and do eventually adapt to that if we're persistent. And there are ways to do that in a more nurturing fashion, and there are ways to do that so that it will be less painful on everybody and more successful. And then there's ways to do it in ways that are not nearly as kind, and those are not the ways I would recommend. But in terms of offering water, I think it's really hard to hear a baby fussing and for mom to be in the other room worrying, well, what if he's thirsty? And so for partner to be able to offer a sip of water or two, that can help, but don't replace it with a bottle feeding of water, which then creates a new sleep association. Drop the first feeding first, because a baby's sleep pressure is greatest in the beginning of the night, and they're more likely to be able to fall back asleep. And that 3 or 4 a.m. time frame, number one, it's been a long time since the last time they ate, and number two, their sleep pressure is much lighter at that point, and it's going to be a harder time for them to fall back asleep. So that's probably a much better time to do the one feeding, if that's what you're kind of weaning down to. And then also we do know that physiologically, or 3 or 4 a.m. feeding helps mom's prolactin levels and keeps milk supply up. And as you begin feeding less at night, you can allow your body to adjust, and sometimes your breasts will wake you up before your baby does. And it's up to you if you want your body to just get used to that, or if you want to express. Or my typical recommendation is for moms to express milk just before they go to sleep to extend the period of time that they can be comfortable. So if your baby goes to sleep if the last time you breastfeed is 7 or 8 p.m. and then your baby goes down to sleep for the first stretch of the night and you're up until 10, and then the baby's up again to eat at 3 or 4, if you express at 10 or 10:30 just before you go to sleep, it's more likely that the baby will wake you up instead of your body. And I just put a link here to the ISIS sleep support team, which I oversee, and I can tell you it is a very personalized and gradual approach. No cookie cutter approach, and no put the baby in a room, close the door, and let them cry approach. Okay, so how to begin going about it, it depends on age and stage. So for a younger baby, you will preferably swap out one feeding every few days or a week. And typically the easiest feeding to drop is going to be a midday feeding. So when there's activity, when you're in and out of the house and so on, often that's an easier one to switch out. And of course, if you have a big storage of expressed milk, then that would be preferable. The longer we can keep the babies on exclusive breast milk is preferred. So one thing to know about is if you're listening in and you do have a very young baby who has never had formula, do not give a bottle of formula just to see if the baby will take it or likes it. Save that until you actually, if ever, need to introduce it, because there's something very, very special about the gut mucosa and um, uh, the structure of a baby, of a exclusively breastfed baby's intestinal lining. And you don't want to go and add foreign proteins to that, and you don't want to go and destroy the beneficial bacteria that's in there if you don't need to. So keep the baby on exclusive breast milk as long as possible. If they do have formula or something other than breast milk in their system, it usually takes another 2 weeks or so to regrow all of the types of bacteria that are found in breast milk-fed babies' intestinal lining. But what you can't do is take away the fact that they were sensitized to a particular protein. So expressed milk or formula, iron-fortified formula. Typical formula is actually powdered cow's milk that then is broken down a little further to make the proteins able to be digested, and then various powdered iron and vitamins supplements added to it. The DHA and ARA that they add to formula does not do the same thing as the DHA and ARA in breast milk. Nice research just came out showing that. Soy formula, there's really not a great place for soy formula anymore. It used to be an alternative to cow's milk-based formula, but now typically if we know a baby can't tolerate cow's milk-based formula, very often we may suggest a hypoallergenic formula rather than soy. Soy is just another allergenic protein to introduce. So speak to your pediatrician to find out, if you are not giving the baby breast milk, what do they think the baby should be getting. And of course, under 6 months, any dropped breastfeeding will be replaced with expressed breast milk or formula. But over 6 months, you will begin dabbling in solid foods. Now, solid foods don't take the place of a breastfeeding, but gradually become additional filler that over the course of the next 6 months, up until closer to 12 months, begins to assume some nutritional responsibility in the baby's intake. So even at a year old, at 12 months old, perhaps 50% or more of a baby's nutrition is still going to come from their milk source. So that may at some point be 25% breast milk, 25% cow's milk or formula or modified cow's milk. And then gradually, gradually the solid foods will slowly begin to play more of an important role. So between 6 to 9 months, you'll be doing mostly milk feedings, breast milk or formula, and then dabbling in solid foods. And then from 9 to 12 months, gradual increase in solid foods, and begin introducing dairy foods and protein foods. So if, for example, your baby is 10 or 11 months old and they're breastfeeding less, you don't necessarily there are calcium fortified juices that can be used like 1 ounce at a time. You could give 1 ounce of juice and 2 ounces of water in a cup, a sippy cup or a straw top, plus yogurts and cheeses and things like that. And that will, along with the breast milk diet and their solid foods, help their needs. And then after 1 year, typically you would switch if they're getting formula, you would switch to a cow's milk. There's no need to switch to cow's milk from breastfeeding if you're continuing to breastfeed. I'm not sure if she's on the chat today, but a mom had emailed me during the week saying that she went to her baby's, I think it was the 9-month visit, and the pediatrician actually told her to start breastfeeding less, or maybe the baby was a year old, I can't remember now, but to start breastfeeding less to make sure that the baby was taking in an appropriate amount of cow's milk. And I mean, that was, smack my palm against my head. That is completely missing the point. To think that, that another mammal's milk is going to be more beneficial or appropriate for the baby than mother's milk is pretty off the mark. But you can use a combination, so you can breastfeed 2 or 3 times a day and still give your baby a cup of milk, or still give your baby a yogurt and a handful of cheese, as well as their solid foods. And that will meet their needs for calcium, for fat, and for protein. Now, I do get a lot of questions about alternative milks, and I put a reference to the feeding webinar and the cups, straws, and what I like to call milks, fake milks webinar, because I'm not going to get into that in great detail, but none of these really are good options in terms of a milk substitute. So almond milk, rice milk, soy milks, hemp, and so on. None of these really do a great job replacing the calcium, the fat, and the protein, and the vitamin D that's found in cow's milk, never mind breast milk. Now, breast milk doesn't have high sources of vitamin D, but that's a whole separate issue. But a lot of these fake milks do have supplementation, so some of them are supplemented with calcium, but when you read the labels carefully, you'll see a lot of them are very high in sugar and very, very low in protein. So if your baby is not a cow's milk drinker from the cup, number one, try a straw. A lot of times babies do better with straws. You can actually get Parmalat, which is the milk that comes in the carton with a little straw, like a juice box. Some kids like that. Shredded cheese and yogurt. If your baby doesn't drink any cow's milk, that's okay. They don't need to drink milk. They just need calcium, proteins, and fats. And then the picture on the right-hand side is just a visual reminder. I have to say, it's pretty hard to get replacements for dairy into a baby's intake. So it's very easy if a baby is breastfeeding a few times a day and then you're supplementing with various solid foods. But if the baby is getting no breast milk and is allergic to dairy or doesn't drink any cow's milk is a very easy package of calcium, fat, and protein if the baby isn't getting breast milk. You'd have to eat a whole lot of dark green leafy vegetables, and then a lot of these other foods are just not very toddler friendly. So sardines with bones, a whole cup or more of beans. A lot of these are artificially supplemented with calcium, like the juices, and tofu. Soy is not naturally high in calcium, but they can supplement it, and so on. So it's hard to get a lot of calcium and protein and fat in an easy package into a toddler, and that's why the dairy foods are pretty easy for that. Milk. Although cow's milk is not truly a complete food, breast milk is a complete food, and and then gradually after 6 months adding solid foods, and then gradually more solid foods. But the breast milk's benefit never goes away. Okay, so for an older baby, so let me just recap. For the younger baby, you're going to switch out one breastfeeding every few days to a week. So you're just going to drop a middle of the day breastfeeding and introduce your alternate milk, which hopefully is expressed breast milk, or gradually, can be formula, and then later on you'll choose a second feeding, and often it's the morning feedings and the bedtime feedings, or the last breastfeedings, that go away. You may find as your milk supply begins to decrease, the younger baby's interest in breastfeeding decreases too. So sometimes your plan is to drop one feeding a week for 6 weeks, but you find after week 3, the baby is fussing at the breast and wants to just go quickly to the bottle. So emotionally keep in mind it may go faster than you planned if your baby is young. For an older baby, they're a little bit more determined, and they're less concerned with the volume of milk or the flavor of milk if you're pregnant, and they're more concerned with getting some special cuddly time. And of course, that's one of the beautiful benefits of breastfeeding. So the boring chair works well, and that means having a special place where you nurse, and that's the only place you nurse in the house, and you need to stop everything and go there when it's time to nurse, and it becomes a little bit of a boring production. So, oh, you want to stop playing in the living room and doing this fun thing because you want to go upstairs and nurse? Okay, and then you have to go upstairs and sit in the boring room and nurse, because you can offer a tempting substitute. Oh, you want to go upstairs to the boring nursing chair and nurse? Well, we could. Or we could go sit at the kitchen table, and you could pick one of your new Crazy Straw cups and have some crackers and some milk, and I could read you a book. So, you know, really, which one becomes more preferable? So you want to make boring nursing in a very plain, dull environment, make that a little bit less tempting than some of the things that you can offer as a replacement. And then this another, kind of standard is don't offer, don't refuse, become a moving target. So do not be a sitting duck. If you sit on the couch and your toddler comes right over to you like this cute little boy, you know, you're sitting in the nursing chair, he's going to come over and try to climb up on your lap. Don't be a sitting duck. Don't sit there. As soon as you see that he's coming your way, you got to pop up. You got to be like Julie, the cruise director on the Love Boat, and say, "Hey, let's go outside and go on the swing," or "Hey, let's go in the other room and look at that new puzzle, and we'll do that together." So, don't give him the opportunity to come over and ask to nurse. Intercept, distract. One of my Twitter friends yesterday called that "ooh, shiny." Take advantage of the fact that your baby is your toddler is distractible, and delay tactics are also helpful. So you can say, "Yep." So you don't want to refuse to nurse and create stress, but if he asks to nurse, you can delay that very briefly. Yep, sure. Let mommy just go to the bathroom, and then I'll come back. And then when you're in the bathroom, you can say, "Oh, hey, do you want to come wash your hands with me?" And then you're in the bathroom, and then maybe next thing you know, you're playing with the bubbles in the water, and then the next thing you know, you're going to take the dog for a walk. So that's a nice example of using distraction and delay tactics to go away from that nursing session. And then another good recommendation is to alter the bedtime and the morning routines. So of course, for an older baby, these are triggers for nursing, and getting your partner more involved in the bedtime routine. This is a great time for moms to sign up for an evening class, or maybe join a gym, or go take a walk around the lake, or whatever it is, but you want to shift it up so that you are not the one that's there hanging out at bedtime, creating stress and a trigger for your baby to want to come over and nurse. And same thing in the morning. Maybe in the morning you would get up, bring the baby into bed, or sit in the living room and nurse before breakfast. So maybe now you have to have a new routine. Set up some toys in the evening before you go to sleep. So the first thing you do in the morning is you scoop up your baby, you come downstairs, there's something already set up for them to engage them immediately while you go cut up some fruit and toast a waffle, and then they're in the high chair, they're having their meal, and so on. So shift that routine and alter the pattern. Finally, I just want to remind you that that there are going to be physical and emotional adjustments to weaning. So even if it's a slow and gradual process, when you're finally done, you may find even a few days later you have transient fullness, that your breasts are a little bit soft, a little bit lumpy, and then one day they just feel all firm and hard again. And temporary leaking, you may find if you milk letdown is triggered if you hear a baby cry or in the morning. But generally, over the course of a number of days with no stimulation, the breasts will become a little bit softer. They'll be lumpy. They will feel very lumpy, and that's normal. And it's also very normal that you can still express some drops of milk many weeks later, even months later. But don't keep trying. If you're in the shower and every single time you take a shower or once a week, you check to see if you can still express a drop of milk, which of course we all do that. But I suggest, the less stimulation, the better, when you are trying to dry up completely. And don't be surprised too if you feel a little bit sad or weepy, or if you start thinking that you want another baby right away. Weaning truly is a separation. It's a transition for you, as well as a hormonal shift as well. So the oxytocin levels change, and your prolactin levels change, and your estrogen cycles back up. And another thing is that being a nursing mom often is part of your identity, or how you think of yourself as a parent, and it may be an important part of the way you parent, or how you think of yourself as a parent. And sometimes moms will even ask themselves, like, how will I parent? How can I nurture my baby without breastfeeding? But you will find your ways, and there are so many ways to be close and connected. One thing I just want to remind people is one of the, another benefit of breastfeeding is that physical closeness, the skin to skin, and the cuddling time. So as you move through the weaning process, don't let go of that. Even though babies are capable of holding a bottle on their own and so on, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be held and cuddled during feeding times. And find other ways to be very close and connected that don't necessarily involve breastfeeding, and you will find that you are still very much a mother, and that you're still very, very connected and attached to your baby, even when breastfeeding is not part of your parenting. So you want to make sure that there's plenty of cuddle time. I've got so many questions here. I don't think I'm going to read you this poem. I don't know, Cindy, should I read it? No. But I want you to look at, I didn't put a hyperlink in there, but write down that title and do the Google search and read it, because it's just a poem that really speaks to me and has over the years, and I think it's worth reading, and it will make you cry. Okay, I'm going to get to all these questions, and let's see. Reminder, there's no webinar next week. I'm going to be at a sleep conference next week, so I can come back and help all of you moms and babies sleep in kind and gentle ways, because we all need our beauty sleep. So please add the next webinar date to your calendar. It's going to be the 21st. And I think I'll have an open seminar then, so no topic, just Q&A for the whole time. And remember to add that to your calendar. The link is the same. You can follow us on Twitter. And I have 2 other webinars to tell you about. Hopefully these links work for you. Next Tuesday evening is we have a fabulous speaker, Dr. Ali Domar, who is truly internationally known. She is one of the leaders in the mind-body fertility movement, and she's going to be speaking with us here at ISIS. It's a free webinar. Anybody can register, and even if you can't attend live, you'll get a recording. You can learn more about your fertility and how to use various approaches to fertility, from mind-body to assisted reproductive technology. So maybe share it with your friends or networks as well. And then I am a guest on a Bright Horizons webinar. They invited me to come and speak on breastfeeding, pumping, and working, and that is Wednesday, June 13th. So both of these links, you can register separately. You got to register for each one of these. The June 13th webinar, let me tell you, through Bright Horizons, we're giving away a Medela breast pump. So I suspect even if you can't attend live, if you register for that, you probably are still eligible to win the Medela breast pump. Okay, Cindy, would you shift the deck for me? And let's see. Here's a question from a mom who says, I'd like to hear more about the end game on pumping. My daughter's 11 months old. Neither of us are interested in weaning, but I'm still pumping 3 times a day at work and getting tired of it. I'm not pumping that much either. I wonder if she asked this before I answered all these questions. I think she did. Okay, so basically I told you in the webinar, when you are pumping at work, you can decrease it 3 different ways. You can decrease the frequency that you're pumping. If you've been pumping 3 times, go down to 2 and then eventually to 1. Plus you can pump either for a shorter volume of milk or shorter minutes of time. Okay, here's a question from a mom who says, what is a safe amount of weight to lose while breastfeeding? I've had an oversupply, so I'm not worried about it affecting production at this point. Good. Okay. So as long as you are taking in adequate calories and hydration, you don't need to worry so much about the quantity or quality of your breast milk, because your body will do what it needs to do to make high quality breast milk. What you do need to worry about is your own nutrition. And of course, a lot of moms find that they're extra hungry when they're breastfeeding. But one nice thing about breastfeeding is that it does rev up your metabolism. So if you try to eat reasonably well, cut down on your junk food. Snacking is very, very easy and common and necessary when you're breastfeeding, so make sure you're stocking your kitchen and your diaper bag and your car with foods that are pleasurable but better choices when you are snacking, because it's much easier to reach for a handful of crackers than to cut up an entire cantaloupe. So I always suggest, buying your fruit already cut up and ready to eat, because you're more likely to open up a container and eat the little cubes of cantaloupe than have your hands and time available to cut one up yourself. But losing 1 to 2 pounds a week is what I would recommend. And really for anybody, that's the best way to lose weight, slowly and steadily. And you're more likely to keep it off that way. I don't know personally, but I have heard very good things about the Weight Watchers program for nursing moms. They have a special program for nursing moms. A lot of people like the Weight Watchers program. I think you can do it online as well as in person. And I've heard they've got a very good program for nursing moms. Let's see, can I quickly quantify abrupt or gradual weaning? Okay. Abrupt weaning would be stopping very quickly or over the course of several days. And a gradual weaning would be beginning to substitute another food or liquid, and do that more slowly over the course of a couple of weeks to a couple of months. One thing I meant to talk about, but for some reason didn't get into it, is it's going to be easier on your baby's digestive system to get used to cow's milk or get used to formula gradually when it is interspersed with breastfeeding, rather than just going from all breast milk one day or breast milk with 1 bottle of formula one day to completely formula the next. So both cow's milk and formula can cause stomach upset or constipation. So I would do it as a slightly slower transition. For some babies that seem to refuse cow's milk, couple things to think about. Whole milk or 2%. Some babies that refuse whole milk will take 2%. Maybe to them it's a little bit more similar consistency to breast milk. Another thing to try is to mix breast milk and formula, or breast milk and cow's milk, and make a blend. So if you're introducing cow's milk for the first time, you may do 2 ounces of cow's milk and 2 ounces of breast milk, and let the baby take that and see how they do with that, and then gradually go to straight cow's milk from there. Okay, 12-week-old son has been eating every 2 hours around the clock since he was born. Slept 4 to 5 hours at night, a handful of times, but not consistently. Is this something I need to keep waiting out? Will he eventually start sleeping longer, or is there something I can do to encourage him to sleep between feeds? When I feed him at night, he goes right back to sleep, but when I try to get him to sleep another way by rocking, he protests. Okay, so 2 weeks old, eating every 2 hours around the clock since birth. I would want to know a little bit more about his weight gain, and 12 weeks, he's just starting to come out of the woods in terms of being able to be interested in things that are going on around him. Is he eating his hands? Is he starting to play with toys? Is he starting to coo and smile and be interested and distracted in other things? Because that can help the frequent feeding as well. So if this baby is packing on the pounds, I might deal with it one way. If this baby is a lean, mean string bean, I might deal with it another way. I think I would recommend that you speak with your pediatrician, and that you, if you're local in Boston, I would encourage a lactation consult so we get a better handle on what's going on. So I could guide you better, because it's hard to steer you in that direction. Okay, last question. We saw a nutritionist this week for my 6-month-old. twin boy who came almost 2 months premature. She suggested adding a bottle or two for both babies because my milk supply won't make it to a year. Is this true? That's funny. What does she think is going to happen to it? You've got 2 babies nursing throughout the day. And is your milk going to just pack up its bags and go away? Well, if you start taking estrogen-containing birth control or you become pregnant, I suppose you could have a significant dip in your milk production. But if your babies continue to nurse, then that's not going to happen. So yeah, that would be a nutritionist who may know a whole lot about nutrition, but may not know a whole lot about the way lactation works. So as long as you continue removing large volumes of milk, which your 2 babies are doing on a regular basis, your body will continue making it. Indefinitely, well, kind of almost indefinitely, and that's how wet nurses made a living back in the day. Okay. So this mom replied, "Thanks. It sounds like we're getting a new nutritionist." Well, you know, you may not go to, it's unfortunate, but you may not go to your nutritionist for breastfeeding advice, just like you may not go to your pediatrician for parenting advice. So you may go to them for advice on foods to offer your baby and the caloric content and texture issues and things like that, or allergy issues if that's relevant. But it is important and as nice as it would be for your nutritionist to be very well informed about breast milk and breastfeeding. Sometimes you don't always get all of the information you need in one place. A lot of nutritionists work for WIC, and now WIC really is a great breastfeeding support. But I'm sorry that you didn't get great breastfeeding advice there. Okay, so I think we need to wrap up, it being 1 o'clock. Reminder, no breastfeeding chat next week, but next time will be on the 21st with an open forum, so all questions and answers the whole time. Cindy, will I be on this fertility webinar on Tuesday? Usually I moderate these in the chat room. I'm not sure if I'm on deck for this. But if so, join me on June 12th. Yes, I'm in the chat room. She says I'm in the chat room. Join me on Tuesday, June 12th in the chat room for the fertility mind body with Dr. Domar, and then join me at Bright Horizons webinar on breastfeeding, pumping, and working. And I'll see you back in 2 weeks' time. Happy nurturing. Thanks for being here.